all for being here, and thank you for that unexpected break. And also, thank you to Jordan. I really want to say the whole spirit of this gathering has, to create a venue. Thank you. Yeah. Where we're really going to have an opportunity for so much interaction. That's what I really look forward to here, is hearing from you. I'm honored to be architecting a new paradigm with you. And so thank you. When I first heard about it, Jordan said, I'm going to have this conference, Architecting the New Paradigm, and you can come, you can talk about anything that you want. I was like, wow, that's an intriguing invitation. All right. I mean, architecture is right up my alley. I actually went to college initially to become an architect, but it was Berkeley in the 60s, and there was a lot going on, and I was learning about it. And so instead, I ended up studying journalism and nonviolent civil disobedience. But so it's fun. It's fun to come back around and look at architecture within the context of the new paradigm that I was getting into those other things to help create. And, architecture provides some interesting parameters, actually. I had this random recall of something from my college application, which was this architect from ancient Rome, 1st AD, Vitruvius, who's the first one who came up with some standards that architects are supposed to achieve, and that's actually still applied today. Architects, in designing a system or a structure, are supposed to achieve three things. They have to make something that's durable, something that meets the purpose for which it's created, and something that brings beauty or delight. So I thought, great, let's do that. Let's design a purposeful, durable, delightful new paradigm. So I come at this, I'm a producer. I produce Thrive, I've produced all kinds of things in my life. And so I come at this very strategically and practically. So of course, my first question is, what is the new paradigm? And, I probably get 5 different emails in my messages with the term new paradigm every week. And I think I'm not sure that the people writing those would actually all agree on what the new paradigm is, or certainly not on the strategies for how we're going to achieve it. So, I'm guessing we would all agree that what the new paradigm has us more harmoniously interacting with ourselves and each other and the planet and the cosmos. But that's pretty vague, and it's like I want to make a movie or something. It's like gotta get down here into something a little more specific. So, as the producer in me, I decided that I wanted to actually take on 3 specific goals that I want in my new paradigm. I hope you want them in yours also. But in any case, I'm going to use these to model an example of a process that I think we need to engage in. I so appreciate what Richard was talking about and the recognition of the war that we're in and how are we each going to respond to that. And short of what we're going, what are you willing to go to jail for? I really want to look at our day-to-day decisions and see if there are things that we are inadvertently doing that might be contributing to the old paradigm and preventing us from actually designing and creating this new one. So it's going to be a very personal and practical approach to designing this new paradigm. And the 3 goals that I have chosen are equal rights. To me, equal rights is just kind of a basis of how I want us to be in this new paradigm. Next is freedom of personal expression. Clearly we know these are the things that have gone from our world, and so I want to make sure that they're back in the new paradigm. And third is no wars of aggression, okay? So so I'm going to take these apart with, how our daily decisions are either going to achieve or not achieve these things in the new paradigm. And I want to begin with two things. One, I want to ask that you listen with your hearts as well as your minds, because I believe there is a lot of healing to do between here and this new paradigm. And I believe that we need to feel it to heal it. So I also want to say that I feel that my perspective is that living the new paradigm is a process. It's not a product. It's not a political party. It's a lot of decisions that are going to get made that either do or don't add up to a new paradigm. And so that's how basically we're going to go at this. And because I take this personal orientation with it and how Monday is going to be different from today, I want to begin with something very personal, which is passion. It's inspiration materialized into action with as much heart, mind, body, and soul as possible. Passion, it's not just enthusiasm or excitement. It's actually very strategic for a few reasons. One, people don't change unless they're emotionally impacted. It's just proven. Clearly, we would be in a different state if we did everything that we knew we should do, right? It's the stuff we get emotionally impacted by that we actually incorporate as change. So when you're in touch with your passion, you have more emotion exuding and people are more impacted by you. The other thing is you don't burn out, because when you're doing something you're passionate about, it's fun. And this is a long haul. So this actually has strategic implications to be engaged with your passion. And I was reminded of this recently when I was rewatching one of my favorite all-time old movies from 1990, Ghost. I'm going to give you a little spoiler alert, because this movie with Patrick Swayze and Demi Moore has it's fabulous, sensuous love scene. In fact, this scene was voted the most romantic film moment in history, and I love it. So, and this is going to have something to do with passion, because Patrick Swayze is a banker. Demi Moore, he's madly in love with her. She's an artist, and this is the cast of characters. And I'm just going to say two things that happen in the movie, but you can see it to find out the rest. Patrick is the banker. This is his friend, played by Tom Goldwyn, who he thinks is a friend, his fellow banker buddy, who's actually a sleazy guy and murders Patrick. And it turns out Patrick gets kind of stuck between realms. He doesn't just die, he gets stuck between realms, and he finds out that Tom Goldwyn's planning to kill Demi Moore also. So Patrick is passionate about getting a message to save Demi, but he's concocting all these things. This is the kind, he goes to Whoopi Goldberg, and as a psychic, she's hilarious. It's worth seeing just for that, to try to get the message to Demi that she's in trouble. And he also runs into this fellow ghost, Vincent Schiavelli. And this guy's on the subway, and he's ripping papers out of people's hands. He's having all this impact in the world, right? And Patrick says, "How are you doing that? I can't get her to see that I'm here to give her any kind of message." And the fellow ghost says, "You can't just think it. You've got to feel it," right? So he teaches Patrick how to really feel his passion and get into it and have this impact in the world. And he does it, and Patrick gets all his feeling. He can push the shoe off the can in the subway and stuff and get the message to me, and the rest I'll let you see. But the point when I was watching it is that this is right on. Whether it's between realms or in one realm, we really need to engage our passion if we're going to have impact. And another big advantage that comes from engaging passion is that when aligning with the current of our passion, that's how our purpose is revealed. And purpose has a lot to do with how we're going to get out of the mess that we're in. Purpose is the reason for which something is done or created, or for which something exists. So in my experience, life is hard, and it's really helpful to know why you're here. What is this all about? And it's actually a very personal, unique answer that will emerge when you get into that. And it's, it's where your heart and your mind and your spirit all find each other and work together. And the uniqueness that we experience, instead of it just being that we're lonely, and feel different from everybody else, you get to experience it as feeling unique. You got something here to offer that's just yours. And one thing I want to say about this being in the flow with your passion and your purpose is that I believe you will avert one of the greatest regrets I can imagine having, which is getting to the end of life and feeling that you weren't fully alive, right? I don't want that to happen. I don't think anybody wants that to happen. And one way to make sure it won't happen is to be really into your purpose and your passion and knowing that you're living your life to the fullest. So how do we show what we know about ourselves? All right, we got our purpose and our passion. Like, how do we demonstrate these? How do we demonstrate the worldview that Danny was talking about? There aren't that many ways that we show who we are. What we say, how we spend our time, and what we support with our money. That's it. If someone's looking in on your life, that's actually how they get to know what it is that you care about and who you are. And what happens when there's a conflict between one of these things and our purpose and our passion and our values and what it is we believe in? That's where daily decisions come in, and I have a lot of personal, hard-won stories about how this notion of conflicted or unconflicted behavior came to be. Remember I said I went to Berkeley in the 60s. There was a whole lot going on there, and I was very involved in it. Probably the thing I was most passionately involved in the beginning was the stopping the proliferation of nuclear power and nuclear war. Super passionate. Helped to organize a group where we would do a lot of research, generate various campaigns on this issue. And we went like almost every Friday night. I would go from my job, deposit my paycheck into the bank, and go to these meetings where we really worked hard to expose the issue and come up with stuff. And, we were a bunch of hippies from the 60s, and we did... And we did get our work done. And one of the things that was happening, researching away, is that I found out that one of the ways that the corporations get these big advantages to get so powerful as they are is that they get cheap loans from the banks. So there I am, figuring that out. And then I realized, wait a minute, remember how I was depositing my paycheck on my way to my work where I was so passionately involved? And I was, stopping off at Bank of America, always conveniently located, and depositing my paycheck and finding out that Bank of America was making cheap loans to the corporations that I was then going off working tirelessly to try to stop. What's worse is that with fractional reserve, they're funding all the same corporations. And because of fractional reserve, they're multiplying my deposit times 10, right, to make loans to these killing and polluting corporations all over the planet. And so they've got 10 times my money in the bank, but there aren't 10 of me showing up working. This is conflicted behavior, right? All my good passion and purpose was not being supported by my daily decision to go stick my paycheck there. And that's when I realized that passionate intent needs unconflicted behavior in order to manifest. It's that basic. But, unconflicted behavior needs information in order to be effective, right? If I hadn't learned about the banks and how they worked, I wouldn't have known that my behavior was conflicted. So how do we get informed? I mean, there's so much disinformation and biased information, and you got your mother and your friends and this magazine and that telling you various things, and I realized this is all about critical thinking, right? I have got to figure out, motivated by my wanting to be passionate and purposeful and stuff, I better figure out how to do some critical thinking. And I was greatly facilitated by F. Scott Fitzgerald, who said the test of a first-rate intelligence is the ability to hold two opposing ideas in the mind at the same time and still retain the ability to function, right? So that really matters, because you have to just try it on, not actually believe something that you hear. You try it on. And this is where critical thinking, and it's like consciousness and activism come together here for me. Because, when I'm, like, critical thinking requires a state of not knowing. It's like that quiet mind, right, in meditation. And I love it when I'm just blissed out and I have no thoughts. But the real value for me of meditation is coming back, right? When I'm meditating, then whoops, I'm totally distracted with this thought. And I come back to center. It's that way with, critical thinking and listening to these different ideas. And whoops, I'm reacting. Oops, okay, come back. I know how to do this, to actually hold these things. All right, so here we are. We're passionate, on purpose, informed, committed to unconflicted behavior. Let's get specific about equal rights. What are we going to do in our daily lives to deal with equal rights? I want to talk about this in terms of the role of technology in human evolution and how that might be impacting our goal. Specifically, transhumanism. It's a huge, hundreds of billions of dollars invested into the international movement of transhumanism, which is essentially an interface of technology and humans. And the basic worldview of transhumanists is that consciousness is the material consequence of synaptic impulses. That's it. That's what the whole thing is about. And since robots are so much more efficient, it would be really smart if we turn over not just our world, but human evolution to technology and robots. Transhumanism, also called singularity, was introduced into the mainstream by Ray Kurzweil. He's currently the director of engineering at Google. This is an interesting title of time, 2045, the year man becomes immortal. One of the self-proclaimed tasks of the transhumanist movement is their idea is that we will never die. You can clone yourself, you can design your perfect next self, and live forever, right? So they say what they're after is to cure death, okay? That's the notion here. And they want to create a version of humanity that is so efficient, so different from what we now have, that it merits the term post-human. So this is a very significant thing because Google has a lot of resources. They have a relationship with the NSA. They have access to all of our personal data. There's hundreds of billions of dollars invested in this. And they have recently purchased 8 robotic companies since Kurzweil's been there. One, Boston Dynamics, another DeepMind, artificial intelligence company in London. They have autonomous military robots, drones, humanoids, all kinds of artificial intelligence. Bill Gates, Toyota, Roche Pharmaceuticals, PayPal. Google's not alone in this venture. It's really big. There is obviously all kinds of stuff that can happen from transhumanists. They do 3D printing of organs for organ replacement. They do mind uploading into artificial intelligence, take a human mind and upload it into a robot. And they are designing super soldiers that can go forever, don't die, can kill on any terrain at any time, never get tired. They're after total efficiency. The notion of empathy, intuition, emotional intelligence or a spiritual connection to the cosmos. That is not part of the conversation here. And so in honor of critical thinking, I decided to spend a day with a guy named Ted Chu, who is a big proponent of transhumanism. I mean, this is so offensive to me. You know, when I would get hot flashes when I read about it and thought about it, really. And I wanted to understand, because with hundreds of billions of dollars and these kind of people and corporations behind it, this is what's happening here. So Ted Chu, he says it becomes possible to turbocharge our hedonic indulgences with genetic engineering. So think about it like, oh, that inefficient, you have to make love to have babies. You could just clone yourself. Or eating, like, why bother, right? You can create something that's so much more efficient. That was his perspective. And then he says, it becomes possible to pull the plug on instinctive drives altogether. I like those instinctive drives. Here's the thing. As it's happening. This is happening. And it's going to end up in the new paradigm unless we figure out how it won't, right? And not even how it won't so much is that here's what I learned from being in it, that as offensive and dangerous as it seems to me, you know what? That's how my worldview seems to them. That's the truth here. We do not agree. When I think about the disparate capacities, remember, we're talking about equal rights. So this tiered civilization, I know with the Tour de France and Lance Armstrong and that whole debacle, nobody who wasn't using drugs got any closer than 18th place, right? That's drug enhancement. Imagine when you're talking about, chipped robotic human interface here, this is going to be a very disparate capacities. And we really don't agree. And my not agreeing isn't going to stop technological and scientific advance. I don't believe I have a right to stop that any more than I believe that they have a right to chip me when I don't want to be chipped. And this is where I find the rubber meets the road in designing the new paradigm. How are we going to coexist across worldview? Because you know what? We are not going to agree. At this dinner with Ted Chu, he's like, what's your guys' obsession with freedom? So if I were banking on agreement, getting a worldview that everybody just feels so good about, we're going to all join in, if I had to count on that for my hope, I would be hopeless. That's the truth. But fortunately, disagreement has been going on for a long time. And there are people who have been thinking about this for as far back as 300 BC, and Thomas Jefferson, and Gandhi and King. And what they came up with is something called the non-aggression principle. And it is simply that you don't get to violate me against my will, and I don't get to violate you against your will. It's the one thing that everybody actually agrees to for themselves. Now, some people want to be violated, but then it's not against their will. Some people want to violate others, but think of it, like how hard it is to get people to agree, right? I mean, look at the world that's being described to us with Danny and that we all know about. So the fact that there's something that people actually agree to and that it's a principle, okay, what would that look like? What does that mean in terms of my daily decision? What in terms of accountability and application and a guideline for actually coexisting? How how do we solve problems without coercion? To me, that is the ethical question of the new paradigm. How do we do this? I mean, I would say, first of all, be informed and learn how to engage respectfully with people who you really disagree with. It is so challenging. I couldn't do it if I didn't meditate. And I wasn't kidding about hot flashes. Like, I'm exhausted sometimes after it, but I feel that when I do it, what happens is I understand something, right? I understand that if I know how to navigate, because what I'm looking for is how can they do what they're doing, I'm doing what I'm doing, and we don't violate each other. So there's personal accountability. When someone's polluting, they're violating me, right? So there's a personal accountability. I have a grounds to prosecute that isn't based on us agreeing, other than on the principle that we already said we agreed on. So I have some ground to start to navigate this. And in terms of day-to-day policy and things, I would say one way to have unconflicted behavior along these lines is to make sure that you never support anything that's mandatory. Mandatory is coercion. All right, so this is the level of stuff where I feel like context matters, right? Getting informed, understanding what it is that's going on, and how do we apply this principle when we're looking to actually hold people accountable for what's happening. So freedom of personal expression. What's an important bit of context here going on? The Trans-Pacific Partnership. It is proposed as a new form of global governance structure. It's funny, it says read the deal. It's 5,554 pages. It just came out this last fall. WikiLeaks, fortunately, leaked some of it, the investment section of it, so we could read that in the summer sooner than that. This deal governs 40% of the world's GDP, right, with these 12 Pacific Rim countries. It was negotiated in secret for 7 years. It handles everything from the environment, immigration, the whole economic deal. There's another one just like it, TTIP, doing the same thing in Europe that's worth getting educated about, but I'm just focusing on this one right now. All right, it sounds really good. When you go to the Trans-Pacific Partnership website, it says they're going to stand up for human rights. There's economic and agricultural benefits. It promotes innovation and creativity and protects workers, preserves the environment, ensures free and open internet. I feel like Richard was saying, like, whenever they say that, look the other way, like, and figure out what is this really going to do. All right, what this really does is it empowers multinational corporations to sue governments if corporate profits are impeded. Okay, so we're talking about freedom of personal expression. Let's say you want GMOs labeled. What if that impedes the profits, or is considered to impede the profits of Monsanto? And they're going to threaten to sue your government if you do something to get attention around that. You think the government isn't going to have ever more incentive to make sure that your personal expression and freedom thereof is not challenged? I think they will. There's just in the last few weeks, this came up because TransCanada Oil Company, that is responsible for the Keystone Pipeline, just sued America for $15 billion for impeding their profit by interfering with that pipeline. And then, there's 9,500 corporations in line to do the same if that one goes through. And you know what language they're using for the lawsuit? Pulled it right out of the TPP. It's just laid right in there. In fact, the World Trade Organization went after the Obama administration saying, that little label on meat that says where the meat's from, the country of origin? said somebody might decide not to buy it if they didn't want, if they were worried about the country that it came from. And so we could sue you for that. Well, guess what? Those aren't going to be on your meat anymore. They gave in. They said, okay, never mind, we'll take those off, right? So this is these sanctions and how to incorporate this reality into the process of actually achieving a new paradigm. One of the things it does, I want to name a few other things, it forces internet providers to filter all communications for copyright infringements with the power to censor sites. So remember how it said, oh, it's going to help keep the internet free and open, that's your sure sign. That is not what it does. It just gives more reason to shut down freedom of the internet. It also extends patents to further benefit pharmaceutical companies and weakens requirements for patenting genes in plants. This really shows up in the whole medical cannabis world. This is like Monsanto's dream come true for GMO cannabis and putting small farmers and small dispensaries out. It creates supernatural powers that override national laws and constitutions. So, this is very obviously all of our local movements. This is one thing I want to really do a shout out to Danny and the Romero Institute for the Constitution Protection Zones. Thank you for that, because it's one of the ways around this, and it's something to really pay attention to as we focus our energies locally to make sure that what we're doing there can hold up. All right, so what is unconflicted behavior? What do we do Monday about this? That's still what I come down to. What are we personally going to do about this? I would say one thing is support WikiLeaks. Thank you, WikiLeaks, for getting this stuff out to us so that we know what's going on. Talk about it. Work on ending corporate personhood and supporting the organizations that are after that and after stopping the TPP and the TTIP, the one that's going on in Europe. The other thing is feeling it. This is, this thing about passion, there's so much information about the stuff that's going on. And in my experience, this listening with our hearts and feeling it in order to heal it, the way I do it a lot of times is I'll allow myself to feel it. I don't want to separate it. I think I'm a friend of your soul and an enemy of your project, right? Really work to keep that. So there's a lot of strategic value here to feeling things. And one of the strategic values is that I think what happens is when we engage with our hearts, we find courage there. I mean, courage, the Latin basis of courage, cur, means heart in Latin. So it has practical and etymological applications here. Courage is not being stopped by fear and willing to carry on in spite of danger or difficulty. I think that's really important. It's not that you're not afraid. You cannot look to these times to not be afraid. You need to be willing to proceed anyway. So I'm going to tell you something about courage. There's this story that's referred to all the time, this Solomon Asch study that was done at Swarthmore College in the 50s. And it was used to talk about the group pressure and how we will deny our own reality, even when there's evidence to support it, in order to share the dominant reality of the group we're in. So the host goes out on campus, chooses some unsuspecting students, says, you want to come in, be a part of this experiment, lines them up at a table. This guy on our right will be our unsuspecting student, and they're looking at two screens. On one screen, there's a line that absolutely matches a line on the other screen, right? So these people aren't actually other random students. They're part of the experiment, and they've been told that what they need to do is, go along, hey, B matches the line there. There's some obvious match. But then they're all unanimously going to do, at some point, they're going to say, A matches the line to see if the person will change what they saw actually, in order to go along with that group pressure. And this is relied on all the time to show the impact of group pressure, because it turns out that 75% of the time, that person gave at least one incorrect answer. But here's the thing that was really important to me about this. It's true, 75% gave at least one incorrect answer, but only 5% were always swayed. 25% never swayed, right? And 70% sometimes. So what is it, right? What is it about that 25% that allowed them to stick with what they saw and knew and stand to it? I believe it's courage. And, I think about this sometime. A friend calls it the psychology of non-perception. I can tell you one way that I really feel like I'm in the Solomon Asch study is when I look at the 9/11 Commission report. So I'm supposed to believe that in 3 seconds, Building 7 fell, looking exactly like a controlled demolition, when I can look at a building a few weeks ago, utterly consumed in flames, that didn't fall. I mean, clearly there's enough corruption going on to warrant deep inquiry into all of this. And I think it's one of the things that speaks to, in terms of Monday, what can we do? We can support each other when we're speaking up. Imagine if every time one of those students left the room who had held tight to what he believed, if outside the door someone said, "Thank you. Thank you for doing that. I know your heart must have been beating when you went against what everybody else said and you did it anyway." So thank you to the people, so many of whom are here today, who are holding true to what we see and naming it. One of the things that happens when we make a commitment to having unconflicted behavior is that it adds to our to-do list, right? Psychologically, practically, spiritually. Like if I say, I'm going to do what I can to have my behavior really line up with who I am, I'm going to have to make some changes. And we're all so busy, right? So it's really understandable that sometimes people, it's always easier to see in other people, get into denial, right? Because there's too much consequence to the information. And I think it's helpful for me to understand that. I get it. Some people, they don't have room right now for the change that's going to happen if they know what it is you're talking about. And especially if our solutions can't be based on coercion. Like, wow, that really adds to the to-do list. Almost every solution I was taught, so-called solution, was based on coercion. So now I got to actually rethink the whole thing and do this. And this thing about denial is most evident when we get into taking on our third goal, no wars of aggression. Remember, one of the ways that we show how what we value is by how we spend our money. All right, so, this is just according to the National Priorities Organization, that it's 1/4 of every tax dollar goes to the military. That's nothing, compared to all the money that we really know that Catherine Austin Fitts can document that's really going. The war is different from the military. That doesn't count Homeland Security. I mean, the bottom line is that I am being forced to have conflicted behavior by spending my money on something that I don't want in my new paradigm. So we're here to architect the new paradigm that will have no wars of aggression, and right off the bat, we're leaving and kind of forced into this conflicted behavior. And this is where feeling this, I think, really matters. I know I grew up in this conversation. It's been very real to me for a long time. My grandmother was a suffragette, working to get women the right to vote. And she used to tell me a lot of stories about that movement and these bold, courageous women, getting themselves arrested and standing up. She would tell me inside scoop, like how they would sometimes organize abstinence in order to get the guys to vote the way they wanted. And she said, and that was actually, remember, rape was prosecuted as a crime against men's property not long ago. So this notion of organizing abstinence and getting yourself arrested and standing up like this was really courageous. And I asked her, I said, God, weren't you afraid? And she said, yes, we were afraid, but you know what gave us the courage to do it? She said, we absolutely believed that if women had the right to vote, there would be no more war. She said the suffragette movement was fundamentally an anti-war movement. And then she lost her son to a war she didn't believe in. I remember I went off to college. My brother's, housemate at the time got drafted as a medic into Vietnam, came home so traumatized that he couldn't sleep unless he was sitting up in the living room with the light on, upright all the time. So this thing about war, I feel it. And I don't try not to feel it because I believe that it's that feeling that motivates me to try to figure out what is going on with these wars, what's happening with my money here, and that I'm being told by this old paradigm who says with a straight face, they offer killing as a solution. Like, whoa, I am so sad. I mean, did you know that 22 U.S. soldiers kill themselves every day? That's more than die on the battlefield. And, of course, it doesn't count the hundreds of thousands of civilian deaths and what's going on there, the spent uranium we leave behind, the infrastructure failures, the contaminated water, the people wounded for the rest of their lives. 60,000 U.S. veterans are on the streets of our country every night homeless. The painful truth is that each of us is funding this through our taxes. In 1991, the government banned news coverage of images of dead soldiers being brought back into the country. So you don't see that anymore. I remember in Vietnam, day in and day out, we would watch on the news these caskets coming home, draped in flags, greeted by mothers and fathers and sisters and brothers, and whole towns sometimes coming out in just true mourning, right? And I think what happened is that the nation watched that and we felt it, right? We felt it. I think it broke our hearts right open. And that inside we found courage. And that's why we took to the streets. Because you need to feel it to heal it. So here we are. What do we do? What does it look like Monday morning? What are we going to do? I say do whatever it is you need to do to feel the heartbreaking cascade of pain that war is. And then do whatever the courage in your heart calls you to do. Speak up. If you're into voting, hold those candidates responsible. Look at their war records. It's hideous. Call the headquarters, some accountability here if that's the way you want to go. And also, support war tax resistance. But find someone who's in prison because they refuse to pay war tax and write them a letter and thank them. The range of things that you can do. And one, I was thinking about maybe just get an image of someone, preferably with sound, who's just found out that they lost their child to war. and look at it and listen to this and feel it so deeply that when you think about something like, God, it's just so inconvenient to change my bank. Or, I really like this credit card, this Chase credit card, it's just, they take it everywhere. When you think about that, stop and remember that feeling and that woman. Hold her in your heart. Send her a prayer. Let her know she's not alone. And be grateful for the opportunity that you have to do something. Gay marriage didn't become legal because people stayed home quietly feeling sad about it being illegal. It got legal because some courageous people ventured into some uncomfortable conversations. And that's how it happened. Things change because people make them change. I recently heard an interview with Ray Charles. I thought he just summed it up perfectly. He said, all the notes you need are right underneath your fingers. All you need to do is take the time and care to play the right ones. Thank you.